Now let's expand the early competence beat with a second win, walking route/tricycle familiarity, and adjustment beat with an additional example. Now expand the vulnerability beat slightly and the closing reflection for more depth. Just below threshold, one more small expansion to comfortably clear 4,600. Good. 4,604 words within the required 4,600 to 5,300 range. Here's the final script. My son didn't yell at me. That was the part I wasn't ready for. We were sitting at his kitchen table, and I told him I was retiring, selling the house, and moving to the Philippines, alone. No return date. And he just went quiet, put his fork down, looked at me the way you look at someone who's about to walk into traffic. His wife said it out loud so somebody would. "You're 66, going by yourself with no plan B." She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was scared for me, and I understood that, because underneath the calm face I was showing everyone, I was a little scared too. Here's what was true, if I'm being honest. I was 66 years old. I had just retired from 31 years doing the same kind of work, in the same kind of office, wearing the same kind of tired by 5 o'clock. My wife had passed 4 years earlier. My son was grown, married, 3 states away, building his own life the way he should be. And I had sold the house, not rented it out, sold it. Whatever didn't fit into 2 suitcases went into a storage unit the size of a closet, and the rest I gave away or threw away. I bought a one-way ticket, not because I was trying to prove something, because I didn't know how to buy a round-trip ticket to a life I hadn't started yet. An old co-worker took me to coffee that same week, and he didn't even try to hide his disbelief. "At your age?" he said, like the phrase alone was supposed to end the conversation. He wasn't wrong to wonder. I didn't speak Tagalog or Cebuano. I didn't know a single person there. I had no job waiting, no property, no plan beyond a hotel reservation for 10 nights and a folder of paperwork I'd printed out 3 separate times to make sure it was right. He asked what my plan B was, and when I told him there wasn't one, he just shook his head slowly, like he was watching someone jump without checking the water first. I didn't have a good answer for him that day. I went home anyway and did the math again. What my savings could stretch to, what my pension would cover, how many years I might reasonably have left in decent health, and what I wanted to be able to say about them once they were gone. I wasn't running from anything back home. There wasn't a scandal, a debt, a disaster. That's a detail people always seem to want, some dramatic reason a man does something like this. There wasn't one. I was just tired of being the version of myself that everyone already had figured out. People assume, when a man that age does something like this, that there's a woman involved somewhere. There wasn't. Not yet. Not planned. Not the point. I want to say that plainly right at the start, because it colors everything else people think when they hear this story. And it shouldn't. What actually pulled me toward the Philippines wasn't a brochure, and it wasn't some vague itch for adventure. It was a video. My cousin sent it to me one night. No context, just a link. It was maybe 90 seconds long. Rizal Boulevard, in a city called Dumaguete, right as the sun was going down over the water. Somebody was frying something at a cart off to the side. You could hear the oil popping. A couple of kids were laughing near the seawall. And there was this sound underneath it all. A night market a few streets over. voices calling out prices, somebody's radio playing something I didn't recognize. I watched that 90 seconds 4 times in a row. I couldn't have told you why. I just knew I wanted to be standing in that exact spot at that exact hour, and I wanted it more than I'd wanted anything in longer than I could remember. My cousin mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the Philippines had some kind of retirement visa program for people my age. I didn't look into the details that night. I just kept watching the boulevard, the water, the frying cart. That's what did it. Not adventure. A sound and a color of light. The morning I left, I almost didn't make it past the check-in counter. The airline agent was scanning my documents, and her face changed in a small way I didn't like. She asked about my return flight. I didn't have one. I had a one-way ticket and a printed hotel reservation for the first 10 nights, and apparently that wasn't the answer she wanted. My hands started shaking while I dug through the folder I'd prepared, looking for anything that would prove I had a plan, that I wasn't some man just wandering off into nothing. I remember thinking, absurdly, that if she turned me away right there at the counter, some part of me might actually feel relieved. That thought scared me more than the possibility of being turned away. She let me through, stamped something, handed my documents back, told me to have a good flight in the flat tone people use 40 times a day. And that was it. I was in. On the plane, I had a question that wouldn't leave me alone. What if I've made a mistake? It came during turbulence over the Pacific, when the seatbelt light dinged on and the plane dropped just enough to make my stomach rise into my throat. It came again somewhere over open water, staring at the empty seat beside me, thinking about how my wife would have grabbed my hand about now. And it came a third time on the descent, when the clouds broke and I saw green hills and rice terraces and water the color I didn't have a name for yet, and I thought, what if I've made a mistake? Right alongside thinking, this is the most beautiful place I have ever seen. The wheels touched down, the cabin door opened, and before I'd even reached the jet bridge, the heat found me first. It hit like a wall, thick and wet, carrying something green and something like diesel and something sweet underneath it that I'd later learn was just the smell of a tropical afternoon. My shirt was stuck to my back before I'd walked 20 feet. I stood there a second too long, just breathing it in, half stunned, half wondering what I'd just done to myself. The first hour outside that airport was a blur of sound. Tricycle engines sputtering past, somebody's motorbike horn, a vendor calling out something I couldn't understand near the curb. I climbed into a tricycle with my 2 suitcases wedged against my knees, and the driver took off into traffic that had no lanes I could identify, just a kind of negotiated chaos everyone else seemed fluent in, and I wasn't. Every horn made me flinch. Every near miss with the jeepney made my stomach drop. I sat there sweating through my shirt, gripping the little metal bar by the seat, and I remember thinking that I had never in my life felt so completely out of my depth doing something as simple as sitting in traffic. I tried to stop at a small store near my rented room that afternoon, just to buy water and something simple for dinner, and even that defeated me a little. Labels I couldn't read, brands I didn't recognize. A woman behind the counter said something to me, twice, patiently, before I understood she was asking if I wanted a bag. I nodded too many times, paid with bills I hadn't sorted out yet, fumbling change into my palm like a child counting coins for the first time. I walked back to my room with a liter of water and a can of something I wasn't sure I'd ordered, and I sat down on the edge of the bed and just breathed for a minute. exhausted by an errand that should have taken 5. That first night in my rented room, I lay under a slow ceiling fan that did almost nothing against the heat, listening to sounds I couldn't place. Insects, a rooster going off at the wrong hour, somebody's television 2 walls over. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours, and lying there, damp and exhausted, and completely unmoored, I let myself think the thought I'd been keeping at arm's length since the airport counter. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really had made a mistake, and I was too proud, or too far in, to admit it yet. I didn't decide anything that night. I just let the thought sit there in the dark, because I didn't have the energy to argue with it. The next morning, a woman at the little cafe near my rented room told me, almost proudly, that Dumaguete was known as the city of gentle people. Some old story about a national hero passing through on his way from exile, stopping to walk along the boulevard, and calling the people there gentle. I didn't know if it was true history or town legend, and it didn't matter. I liked having something to hold on to, besides my own doubt. What actually changed things, at least a little, wasn't a big moment. It was the market. I'd put off going for almost a week, telling myself I'd get around to it once I felt more settled. But my little rented kitchen was empty, and I was tired of eating the same 3 things from the same nearby store. So one morning I made myself walk the 10 minutes to the Palenque. Nothing about it was quiet. I stepped in off a street of hard, bright sunlight into aisles lit mostly by bare bulbs hanging over each stall, and it took my eyes a second to adjust. The smell hit next. Fish, salt, something green and earthy underneath, strong enough that I almost turned back around. Vendors were calling out, not at me exactly, just into the general noise of the place, prices and offers I half understood. I stood at the entrance for a full minute like a man deciding whether to step off a curb into traffic. I made myself walk in anyway. I found a stall with fish laid out on ice and a woman behind the counter who noticed me hesitating and asked, in easy English, what I was looking for. I told her I didn't really know, that I just wanted something simple to cook. She picked one up, held it out so I could see its silver blue side catch the light, told me its name, told me how her family cooked it, and then, without my asking, cleaned and filleted it right there on the spot for a small fee that felt like almost nothing. I stood there watching her hands move, quick and sure, and felt something unclench in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. A few stalls down, I found a woman selling mangoes stacked in a small, careful pyramid, and I bought some without haggling because I didn't yet know how, and she smiled and slipped an extra one into my bag without a word. I found out weeks later, after I'd been back to her stall enough times that she started recognizing me on sight, that this was a whole unspoken relationship called being a suki, a regular customer, and that the extra piece of fruit was just what happens once a vendor decides you belong to her corner of the market. Nobody explained the rules to me. I just slowly became someone who had rules extended to him. I walked home that day with 2 bags of groceries I'd bought myself, in a market that had terrified me an hour earlier, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel this early. Pride. Not the kind anyone back home would understand, because on paper it was nothing, a man buying fish and mangoes. But nobody had walked me through it. Nobody had translated for me or held my hand. I had done it myself, badly at first, and then a little less badly. And that was mine. Small, but mine. That was a small moment, but it started something. A week or two later, I finally worked out which of the 3 tricycle drivers who idled near the corner of my street would take me to the market and back for a fair price, without me having to negotiate it fresh every time. One of them, an older man with a gray mustache, started slowing down whenever he saw me step outside, like he'd already decided I was his regular now, too. I found a short walking route to a little cafe that made good coffee, one that didn't require crossing the busiest intersection near my building, and I learned it well enough that I stopped having to think about it, the way you stop thinking about the route to a kitchen you've lived in your whole life. None of it would sound like much if I listed it out, but each one was a tiny proof that I could build a life here with my own 2 hands, one unremarkable errand at a time. It didn't come without friction, though. If I'm being honest, plenty of ordinary things that would have taken me 5 minutes back home took an hour here, or needed 3 tries, or ran on a clock that nobody could explain to me. Paying a bill in person meant standing in a line that moved at its own unhurried pace, no matter how much I shifted my weight and checked my watch. At first, that drove me a little crazy. I'd catch myself getting tense over things that, back home, would have been resolved with one phone call. But I started noticing something else, too. The people around me in that same slow line weren't agitated. They were talking to each other, laughing about something, in no visible hurry at all. Nobody seemed to be losing a piece of themselves standing there the way I was. I remember thinking, somewhere in my 2nd month, that maybe the problem wasn't the pace of the place. Maybe it was the pace I'd brought with me, the one built for a life I didn't have anymore. I didn't have anywhere I needed to rush to. I didn't have a meeting waiting, a commute to beat, a schedule that owned me. I just hadn't figured out yet how to live like that. Slowly, the things that frustrated me started to feel less like obstacles and more like a different rhythm I was being invited into. The rainy season arrived not long after. Months of afternoons where the sky opened up without much warning, and the whole street seemed to pause for it. At first I resented it. Another inconvenience. Laundry that wouldn't dry. Errands rescheduled around the weather. Jeepneys splashing through flooded gutters while I stood under an awning waiting it out. But one particular afternoon, sitting under the covered porch outside my building, watching the rain come down in sheets over the street, listening to the water running off every roof at once and pooling in the gutters below, I realized I wasn't checking my watch. I was just sitting there, watching rain. Something in me that had been braced for years finally loosened its grip a little. I don't think that's the right question, whether the pace here is slower. I think the real question is whether I'd ever let myself sit still like that anywhere, at any pace, in my whole working life. I hadn't. Not because anyone told me to keep moving. I just always had. I want to tell you the truth about the parts that were harder to sit with, because it would be dishonest to leave them out. There were nights, plenty of them, where the apartment got very quiet after dark, and I'd find myself scrolling through old photos on my phone instead of sleeping. My wife at a barbecue we threw 20 years back, laughing at something out of frame. My son as a boy, missing a front tooth, holding up a fish he'd caught that was smaller than his hand. I'd look at those pictures and feel the specific kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being unhappy exactly. It comes from being far away from every person who has known you the longest. One night in particular sticks with me. It was a Sunday, and back home Sundays had always meant something. A call with my son, sometimes a ball game on in the background, my wife's cooking filling the house before she passed. Here, Sunday was just another warm, quiet day. I sat on my little balcony that evening, listening to a neighbor's laughter drifting up from the street below. People who belonged to each other in a way I didn't yet belong to anyone. And I let myself feel exactly how far away I was. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way you feel a bruise when you press on it on purpose. I remember one call home where my son, trying to sound casual about it, asked if I was seeing anyone yet. I understood why he asked. It's the question everyone asks, sooner or later, when a man moves somewhere warm by himself at my age. There's an assumption built into it that a man alone must be looking for someone to fill the space beside him. I told him no, and I meant it, and it wasn't a defensive no. It wasn't me protesting too much. It was just true. I hadn't come here looking for a partner. I'd come here to find out if I could still build something on my own, at an age when most people assume that chapter is closed. Whatever else this trip turned out to be, it was never going to start with me looking for someone to rescue me from being alone. If that ever happened down the road, fine. But it wasn't why I was here. And it still isn't. And I've stopped feeling like I need to explain that twice. That didn't make the quiet nights easier, though. I want to be honest about that, too. Knowing I wasn't looking for romance didn't erase the specific ache of missing people who'd known me 30 years, 40 years, my whole life practically. I let myself feel that loneliness instead of rushing past it. Some weeks it was worse than others. It didn't resolve itself neatly, and I don't think it was supposed to. What changed things, in a way I didn't see coming, started with something small and a little embarrassing. About 4 months in, I'd hired a woman. Well, it doesn't matter what I call her here, but I'll say her name was familiar to me by then, in the particular way a person becomes familiar once you've let them into the ordinary texture of your days, to help around the apartment a few mornings a week. Cooking, some light cleaning, running errands I still hadn't gotten fully comfortable with. It was practical, nothing more, at least at first. I'd had a small health scare not long before. Nothing dramatic, just enough of a dizzy spell one afternoon that it rattled me being alone in a country where I didn't fully know how anything worked yet. And my son had all but begged me to have someone checking in on me regularly. So I did, mostly to give him some peace of mind, and a little to give myself some too. She had a way of refusing to discuss anything serious until she'd fed me first. I'd try to bring up a bill, a repair, some errand I needed done, and she'd wave a hand at me and say we'd talk about it after I'd eaten something properly, no matter what time of day it was or how small the thing I wanted to discuss. At first I found it a little exasperating, a grown man being told when he was allowed to talk business. Looking back, I think it was the first thing that made this place start to feel less like a place I was surviving and more like a place I lived. Then came the afternoon that actually tested me. I was alone in the apartment when the dizziness came back. Worse this time, sharper. And for a few seconds I honestly thought I might go down right there on the tile floor. My chest was tight. My vision narrowed at the edges. The room seemed to tilt very slightly, the way a boat tilts under you before you've even registered the wave. I remember gripping the back of a chair and forcing myself to breathe slowly, the way you're supposed to, even though every part of me wanted to panic, wanted to call out for someone, anyone, and there was no one in the next room to hear it. I called her. Not an ambulance, not my son 3 time zones away who couldn't have done anything from that distance anyway. Her. She picked up on the second ring, heard something in my voice before I'd even finished the sentence, and told me to sit down and stay exactly where I was. She was 5 minutes away. She got me to a small clinic near the market. The same one another retiree I'd met at the cafe had mentioned once in passing, just in case, he'd said. You never know. The waiting room was small, warm, a ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, a nurse calling names from a clipboard in a soft, unhurried voice that somehow made the whole room feel less urgent than it was. She sat with me there, calm, in a way that steadied me more than anything the doctor eventually said. She translated when I needed it, asked the questions I was too rattled to think of myself, held my water bottle out to me twice without being asked, and didn't leave until I was cleared to go home, blood pressure a little high, nothing catastrophic, just my body reminding me I wasn't young anymore. Driving back, riding back, in the tricycle she'd flagged down without hesitation, I sat there in a kind of stunned quiet. Not because of the health scare itself, though that had shaken me plenty. It was because somewhere in that hour of fear, I hadn't panicked. Not really. I'd been afraid, genuinely afraid, and I had still managed to think clearly enough to call the right person, to sit down instead of collapsing, to breathe through it instead of letting it swallow me. At 66 years old, alone, in a country I'd lived in for less than half a year, I had handled something frightening without falling apart. That's when I knew something had changed in me. Quietly, without any fanfare, but for real. That evening she insisted I come to her family's place for dinner instead of going back to an empty apartment, and I didn't have the will to argue. Her mother put more food in front of me than I could finish and scolded me, not unkindly, for scaring everyone. Her younger brother asked me questions about America with the particular bluntness of someone who doesn't yet know he's supposed to be polite about it. Somebody's radio was playing low in the next room, and a fan turned overhead, and there was rice and something in a rich, dark sauce I didn't recognize, but finished twice anyway because I couldn't help myself. I sat at that crowded table, full and a little shaky still from the day, and realized I hadn't felt this specific kind of surrounded in a very long time. Not smothered, surrounded. The way you are when a family simply makes room for you at the table, without asking first whether you deserve it. I didn't come here looking for that. I want to say that again, plainly, because it matters. I came here to prove something to myself, alone, about whether I still had it in me to build a life from nothing, at an age when a lot of people assume you're supposed to be winding down instead. The family I found along the way wasn't a replacement for that. It was what happened after, almost as a byproduct. Once I'd already shown myself I didn't need rescuing, and somehow that felt even better than if I'd gone looking for it on purpose. It's been a while now since that afternoon in the clinic waiting room. My days have a shape to them I couldn't have described to you back at that kitchen table with my son. Mornings at the market, greeting vendors I now know by name, buying mangoes from a woman who still slips me an extra one without being asked. Afternoons with the rain coming down in sheets while I sit under the covered porch and let it. Evenings that are sometimes quiet and alone, and sometimes full of noise at somebody else's crowded table. And I've come to need both kinds. I won't pretend it's perfect, because it isn't. And pretending that would be its own kind of dishonesty. I miss my son in ways that don't have a fix. I miss watching my grandchildren grow up close enough to see the small changes week to week, instead of through photos on a screen. There's a particular coffee shop back home, and a particular friend who used to sit across from me there most Saturdays. And no Palenque mango, however good, quite replaces either of those. Some holidays still land wrong here, an ordinary Tuesday back home turning into a quiet, warm afternoon here that doesn't feel like anything special. And I've had to make my peace with that, too. I still get lonely on certain nights, the specific kind of lonely that comes from distance, not unhappiness. And I've stopped expecting that to ever fully go away. But I don't regret it. Not the leaving, not the fear at that airport counter, not the sleepless first night under a fan that barely moved the heat, not any of it. I wasn't completely sure it was the right decision when I booked that ticket, and I'm still not entirely sure there's such a thing as a right decision. Only ones you commit to and then build a life around. What I know now that I didn't know sitting at my son's kitchen table is that I was still capable of starting over. Not in spite of my age, just at it, the way it actually was. 66 and alone and scared and doing it anyway. I don't think courage has an expiration date stamped on it somewhere, the way people sometimes talk about it, like it's a window that closes once you hit a certain birthday. I think it's just a thing you either use or you don't, whenever the moment in front of you happens to need it. Mine came at 66, on a one-way ticket, in a heat that hit me before I'd even reached the jet bridge. I didn't know that then. I know it now. And most evenings, sitting on my little porch listening to the rain or the radio or nothing at all, that's enough.